first hearing into the state government's proposal to raise the Warragamba Dam wall was held in Windsor yesterday. You will remember that the government voted on this in 2018 to raise the dam wall by 14 metres. Well, the Upper House Committee heard from a range of environmental and flood risk experts, also councils and, various interested parties about their concerns with raising the wall. Some 7,000 hectares of UNESCO-listed forest would be drowned by raising the wall by 14 metres, and people have also expressed their concern about a whole lot of historic Aboriginal sites as well.
One person who gave evidence yesterday was the former Deputy Director with the State Emergency Service, Chaz Keys. Of course, if you were listening to the program yesterday, you would have heard him airing his concerns.
There's something like 130,000 people live or work on that floodplain, and it's likely to double. So what we're talking about is a dangerous area which very rarely, but nevertheless inevitably, will flood very deeply, and there's a large and growing number of people on that floodplain. To me, that's a serious problem, and we need to think very carefully about how we deal with it.
So, considering those concerns, why is the state government pushing ahead? The member for Penrith and Minister for Western Sydney is Stuart Ayres, who's a big supporter of raising the dam wall, and he joins us this morning. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Robbie. Good morning, Wendy.
Hello there. And now, as I mentioned earlier, Minister, there is quite an array of people who are lining up against you and the government's plan to raise the Warragamba wall. And they include, dam experts, ecologists, council members, etc. But you are planning to push on.
Well, Wendy, I think this is an incredibly important investment to secure property and people's lives and the safety associated with both of those across outer Western Sydney. This is an incredibly complex and very large floodplain. I don't think everyone understands it particularly well, but some of the points that Chris was talking about in your interview yesterday about the...
Chaz.
Chaz.
Yep.
Sorry, good point. That Chaz was talking about in your interview yesterday, and the things that he's made public are all incredibly valid. It's a deep floodplain. It's a complex one. It floods very fast at high levels. And what we are dealing with is how do we mitigate the flood risk for the communities that live forward of the Warragamba Dam. So that is places like Penrith, like Windsor, Richmond, right across the Hawkesbury. And we've evaluated over the last few years a number of different ways in which we might be able to do that. Improved flood evacuation routes by better roads, better signage, improving awareness around people's flood risks. And we're implementing all of those things. But none of those things will provide the safety mechanisms that will be available by raising the dam wall, which does primarily two things. It slows the water down in the event of a significant flood that would allow more people to evacuate out of the areas that will be impacted by flood. And in most cases, it will prevent a flood from actually happening. So we think that if we raise the dam wall by 14 metres, it'll reduce the impacts of floods by about 75%.
Okay, many people are saying that you're just doing this so that you can invite more development into that floodplain. Is that the case? Are you planning to build more dwellings in that area?
No, that's absolutely wrong, Robbie. And the reason why that's wrong is because the government and the local councils right across the Hawkesbury Nepean floodplain have absolutely no plan, desire, want, will, whatever you want to call it, to reduce the level at which development is permissible now. So a phrase that's often used is 1 in 100, and it's used from a planning perspective. What that means is that there's a 1% chance every year of a flood being able to reach that particular point in the community.
Okay, but so are you saying that there are no plans from the state government to increase the population on that floodplain over the next 30 years?
No, the population will increase.
In that floodplain?
The population will increase. People who live in Penrith, people who live in Hawkesbury, people who live in Richmond will have kids. Their families will want to live there. It's not about the population increasing on the floodplain. It's about where those people live and how we plan for where they live.
Okay, but the issue here, the issue that has been brought yesterday, not just by Chaz Keys but by other experts, is that by increasing the population in that floodplain, even with the raised dam level, you are risking the lives of many more people there, because it doesn't matter if you raise the dam, whilst it may mitigate some floods. If you get a catastrophic flood, it won't do anything, and the more people you have on that floodplain, the greater the risk there is for catastrophic results.
So, Robbie, where the water goes on the floodplain varies dramatically. So let me use my community of Penrith. A 1 in 100-year flood, or a 1 in 500 flood, which is the largest flood we know on record in the community. It happened in the 1860s. If that flood today happened, it would roughly reach Woodruff Street, which is right in the middle of the Penrith CBD. What that means is that everyone who lives east of Woodruff Street in Penrith still lives on the floodplain, but they won't be impacted by a flood unless it's well above 1 in 500. That's why local governments like Penrith, like Hawkesbury, like Camden and Campbelltown, who live right across the floodplain, have been managing where people live. Now, we need to be able to support the communities that are in locations where the water will be impacting their homes. And those decisions were made, as far back as when Governor Macquarie moved his famous Macquarie towns away from the river and created flood islands. So this is not about putting more people at risk. This is about making sure that we've got the right planning framework to make good decisions, because our population is going to grow. This is not about us saying we're going to increase the population deliberately on the floodplain. This is us being realistic about how population grows and making sure that we've got the infrastructure to protect that population as it increases.
Well, one of the people who spoke yesterday to the inquiry was the Australian National University's flood management expert, Professor Jamie Pittock. He said, that he was disappointed that there was a relative lack of discussion about what the alternatives might be, that they weren't explored. But he also said he was disappointed the government is relying on a once-a-century flood for its planning standard. And here is the quote: "No dam will save us in this valley. Any dam we build will be insufficient at some point. Any dam will eventually fill and spill." Now, as I say, he's a professor at the ANU in flood management. What advice have you had to the contrary?
Well, what I can tell you and your listeners is that we won't be able to stop every flood in this valley. That is absolutely correct. What we are doing, though, is we are investing in infrastructure, we're investing in roads, we are investing in planning, we're investing in the way we engage with the community to make this community much more resilient to what will be inevitable floods. But we have a choice. We can either leave the dam where it is and say that in a flood like the 2011 floods in Brisbane, if that happened today, over 5,000 homes would be impacted and inundated. We'd have over 64,000 people who have to be evacuated. So we can make an investment to mitigate against that cost.
But Brisbane had their own dam and their own levee, and it still didn't save them from flooding.
And as we know, the dams are mostly about water, not flood control, Minister.
Please listen. The dam in Brisbane was designed as a flood mitigation dam, and as we all know, was not operated correctly. The Warragamba Dam is not a flood mitigation dam. It is a water storage dam. This proposal is about giving it flood mitigation capacity. Wendy, when you said in your opening remarks that it will drown thousands of hectares of the World Heritage listed area, can I be really clear? The only time that area would be inundated is when it's not in people's living rooms in Hawkesbury and Penrith and Richmond. And yes, this is a trade-off. We are saying how much of the environment are we prepared to inundate during the time of a significant flood so we don't inundate people's homes, businesses, and put them at risk. We've never hidden the fact that we will have an environmental impact. That's why we're telling people we'll complete an environmental impact statement, we will make it public, you can transparently see that. Off the back of that environmental impact statement, that helps us design the wall so that we know how much it costs, therefore we complete a business case, and the government will then make its decision about whether it proceeds. We're being really upfront here. This is the highest risk floodplain in the country. It's the highest risk floodplain.
It seems to me, Minister, that you are going about things a bit back to front here. You have been spending money from the Climate Change Fund. This was outlined in the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday. Almost $50 million in supporting work to raise the Warragamba Dam wall. And you're having an inquiry, and later on you're going to give us the business case. Haven't you got this all back to front?
Well, the inquiry is being conducted by the Upper House. It's completely independent. It's being chaired by a member of the Legislative Council. And quite frankly, Wendy, I welcome it. I think the more people ask about this, the better off we will be. Currently, right now, only 18% of people who live in the Hawkesbury Nepean think they have a flood risk. That compares to people who live in bushfire zones who now exceed well in excess of 55% of communities who know and understand their bushfire risk. We are well undercooked when it comes to this. So the more discussions we have about flood risk in the Hawkesbury Nepean, the better off we'll be.
Okay. So you have a range of experts there who are giving you advice, and I imagine that you'll be taking that. Can we go to a pretty basic question that I know that a lot of our listeners are asking? Why would we build on a floodplain which should be kept for agricultural purposes? Why would that be covered in houses?
Well, the floodplain isn't covered in houses.
No, but the proposal in the future it will be.
No, that's just false. That is completely false.
Can I just have a look here? This is the Hawkesbury Nepean Flood Risk Management Strategy from 2017. It says, and this is page 3, the New South Wales Government has said that it plans to double the floodplain population over the next 30 years. This same strategy also recommends that Warragamba Dam wall be raised. That's from your own government from 2017.
Yes, but there are areas of the broader floodplain that aren't impacted by floodwater. Surely we must be able to allow our population to grow in a sustainable and manageable way in areas that aren't impacted by floods. Now, where those areas will be impacted by floods is by people who are in water-affected areas that have to evacuate. And so, therefore, it's about reducing the amount of water that can enter the area that is currently populated. And then it's also about making sure that those people who live in those areas that will be impacted by inundation can get out of those communities safely. This is something we have been doing in this country, quite frankly, for thousands of years. And yes, it has evolved, particularly over the last 200 years, and it will continue to evolve because people will continue to live in this part of Sydney.
What have we been doing for thousands of years? We've
been managing floods in the Hawkesbury Nepean.
Who has?
I would think Aboriginal communities. I would then say when we first had colonisation, literally those towns...
You're saying that the Aboriginal people built dams?
No, I'm saying they managed floods, Wendy. They understood how floods...
How did they manage floods?
They moved their communities to where they were safer, which is exactly what we're trying to do. We can't go back over the last 200 years of planning decisions on where communities are. We have to make realistic decisions about infrastructure that helps people who live in areas that will be impacted by floods.
Okay, so what you're saying there is that we shouldn't be building any more dwellings on those floodplains.
No, we should build dwellings in locations that are safe.
But according to the experts, none of that floodplain is safe because if you have a catastrophic flood, all of it will be inundated.
No, that's sorry, Robbie. I know you don't know Western Sydney that well. I know you don't. Well, clearly you don't. Like that statement says that everywhere from the...
Well, look, we had Chaz Keys on yesterday.
You know what, Robbie?
What? Please tell me, Minister. What?
It's a pretty patronising statement to try and say that every area across Western Sydney, from Penrith to...
Well, look, I'm not saying that, but many of these areas that are proposing to be built on will be susceptible to flooding should there be a catastrophic flood. That's my point.
That's correct. And we manage where the population goes so that population growth takes place in areas that won't be impacted by inundation. We have to manage two risks here, where people live and how people evacuate. And where we get the opportunity to make sure that water doesn't impact those areas, which is what the raising of the dam will do, that will reduce the impact on those communities. It will reduce insurance costs. It will reduce the cost of recovery. It will reduce mental health impacts. It will reduce the physical cost of having to rebuild your home or rebuild a school or rebuild a road. Raising Warragamba Dam wall is quite simply an insurance policy against a known risk. We know when the Warragamba Dam wall was built in 1960, literally the next year, we had a 1 in 50-year flood. That's the largest flood probably in living memory for any person living on the floodplain. We know that the Warragamba Dam wall in its current configuration can't reduce risk the way we would do so if we had a higher wall. Now, we have to manage that against the environmental impacts and along with a series of other things to ensure that this community is more flood resilient.
Professor Jamie Pittock from the ANU, he said he was puzzled by the relative lack of discussion about alternatives here. He suggested that you could provide capacity for flood storage in the Warragamba Dam by lowering the full storage level there and perhaps, again, stop putting people in harm's way.
Yeah, so Wendy, we did look at that. One of the things that we evaluated was lowering the permanent water storage by 12 metres. That's roughly equivalent to 40%. So I think in your opening remarks, or there have been in the commentary over the last few days, we're all pretty aware that the Warragamba Dam wall is now at about, the Warragamba Dam storage is around mid-40%. So if we started 40% less, and you lose 50% of your storage, you've only got 10% of Sydney's water storage left. So that would mean we literally would not have any water in Sydney right now had we started with 40% of water less in the dam. That's not a real solution when it comes to flood mitigation. Taking Sydney's drinking water supply away is not a viable or realistic solution. Okay,
well, we wait on what more the inquiry has to tell us, and we'll keep up with what all those who are there are saying about your proposition. And can you tell us whether any of what happens at the inquiry will be, contribute to your final decision, Minister?
Yeah, so the process that we go through now is we complete the environmental impact statements. That includes engagement with registered Aboriginal organisations. They've been doing lots of on-ground research. That EIS will feed particularly where we can mitigate impacts on the environment into the design of the dam. So that impacts the business case, so the actual cost and construction methodology of the dam. Once we've completed those, the government will make an investment decision about proceeding with raising the dam wall. The other thing I just wanted to correct that you said right at the start is that Parliament voted on raising the dam wall. That's not actually correct. What the Parliament voted on was the capacity to inundate parts of the national park that is behind the dam wall, which would only be inundated in the event of a flood. And that means that inundation takes place when it's only we're only preventing that water.
Okay. Oh, thank you for correcting that.
All right. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you.
Cheers. Stuart Ayres, who's the member for Penrith and Minister for Western Sydney, and the case that you're hearing from the state government for the raising of the Warragamba Dam by 14 metres. As you heard, the first of those public hearings were held yesterday, and some of those experts and local councils as well who were against the scheme, who spoke yesterday, and his response to it. It's 7